we can take a look and listen to questions and interactions later on.
Okay. It's ready.
All right. Excellent. Greetings. I am Paula Hall. I am from the Howard University School of Divinity, as my t-shirt so indicates. So are my colleagues. This is my pastor, my friend, colleague, and fellow alumni, Reverend Dr. Sherry Davis Moloch. This is the love of my life, my husband, Reverend Samoris Hall, and this is my son, Aaron Hall, Mr. Aaron Hall. All of us are alum from Howard, thus the tablecloth, and we're excited to be back. This is our second year participating in TheoCon. Last year we came at Virginia Theological, and so we're excited to come up here and be at Messiah College and participate here again. Well, I get exceptionally excited when I have an opportunity to combine pop culture with my own theology. That works for me. That's one of my things. And so I dragged my friends and loved ones into this discussion as well. One of the things that is compelling for me to look at is the differences in how authors present, particularly the characters that I am focused on. In this case, are female, African-American, not necessarily just African-American, but black female protagonists. And so I am up front, I am a Stephen King fan, have been since I was 13 years old when I read Carrie for the very first time. And so since that time, of course, I developed a love for Octavia Butler as well. And so I had to deal with, in my own mind, there are some differences in how they present, particularly black female characters. And so having a discussion among ourselves, when TheoCon came about last year, this was our opportunity to talk to a whole community about what they thought as well. So last year we talked about Octavia Butler and Stephen King and the differences in how they present black female characters' ethics. So did one present them kind of with looser ethics or morality and the other with something else, or what? So that was our discussion last year. This year our discussion is about the differences in how that black female character has to deal with the circumstances of her life. So who does she turn to? Who can a sister look to when she is in a situation? And we're saying that there are definite differences between how these two of my favorite authors present those situations. So that's where we are. Dr. Sherry Moloch is our moderator for our discussion today, and I will turn it over to her.
Thank you. So welcome again. We're so glad you're here. Paula is not the only one who loves Stephen King, and all of us do. I'm a little older than her, so I won't say how old I was when I first read my first book, but I was in high school. And Stephen King has a very special place in my heart because when I had really horrible things going on in my life, I remember my mom died unexpectedly, I was always reading Stephen King books because it could kind of take me away, really away. And so I can mark time in my life and things that were going on in my life by what Stephen King book I was reading. And I also got introduced to Octavia Butler a little bit later on. But we're going to, how many of you all are familiar with Stephen King's work? That should probably be everybody. Octavia Butler? Okay, good.
Excellent.
So that's great. So we have some commonalities in terms of the books. The books we're going to be talking about are the most familiar ones. We'll be talking about Kindred and the Parable Sower from Octavia Butler, and we will be talking about mostly The Stand.
Which next slide is here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we just want to make sure you're familiar with the books, okay, because that helps a lot. Okay. So we're going to talk about, didn't do what we wanted to do, the differences in the sci-fi authors of color, how they present female protagonists in comparison to Caucasian authors. And so we're again focusing on Octavia Butler's Parables of the Sower and the Parables of Talent, and Stephen King's The Stand and the Gunslinger series. And so just out of curiosity, when you think about actually could do both books. So Kindred, Parables of the Sower, and A Parable of the Talents. When you look at the female protagonist of the main character, what biblical comparison comes to your mind? What biblical figure do they remind you of? Doesn't have to be the right answer.
The prophets?
The prophets. Okay.
Mhm.
Others? Panel?
So, for Kindred and for the parables, the character that comes to mind for me is Hagar, right? So Hagar is in a situation that she did not intend to be in. And she has to deal with the outcome of whatever unfortunate circumstance she ends up being in. Of course, for Hagar, you know, she ends up, of course, being kicked out into the desert. That's where she has her encounter with God, but she gets kicked out again. Well, she runs out the first time, she gets kicked out the second time. With, in the parables, it's Lauren, Olamina, and Lauren, of course, her world falls apart when those walls, in this dystopian situation, when those walls fall down and the housing area gets run over, and she has to go out there and make it on her own. And the same thing with Dana. Dana is, in Kindred, is forced into time travel. And she has to make it on her own there in kind of really a horrible situation for the people of that time and for a modern woman to be transported back to as well. So that was my thought. You all agree?
I agree, absolutely.
Excellent.
Okay. Do you all see that or agree with that, or make sense to you? Okay. I also think about Hagar because I think about her having to assist people who are oppressing her,
Yes.
and particularly in Kindred. So Dana has to sort of help the people who are enslaving her, and comes back repeatedly having to help people who are oppressing her. And Hagar is basically a human, incubator for Sarah.
Right.
And against her will, and again, having to help people who are oppressing her, not really having too much voice in that.
Right.
Okay, so Stephen King's The Stand and the Gunslinger series, particularly The Stand, we're thinking about Mother Abigail. Is there a biblical person that comes to your mind when you think about Mother Abigail?
So the one we thought of was Moses, right? Because she's the deliverer, just like Moses was. And so she takes on that responsibility of leading these, first of all, calling the people, and then leading them out of Hemingford Home, which is her house, over to Boulder, Colorado.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So we just said that biblical for both of us. We thought that both these characters rather were the representation of Hagar, kind of in the wilderness. And for Mother Abigail, comparison with Moses. Okay. And then we were talking amongst ourselves about how we could disagree with this, but we thought that Stephen King is not just in his books we talked about, but he presents what people call the quote-unquote magical Negro. So, a magical Negro, these are just a couple of quotes, in films functions to marginalize Black agency, empower, normalize, and hegemonic forms of whiteness, and glorify powerful Black characters in so long as they are placed in racially subservient positions. And then in an article, this person says the magical Negro was a Black character usually depicted as wiser and spiritually deeper than the white protagonist, whose purpose in the plot was to help the protagonist get out of trouble, to help the protagonist realize his own faults and overcome them. And so we were talking about and wondering if we could think about these characters in Stephen King's books in particular, not just The Stand, but in other books too. he has a quote-unquote magical Negro.
So Spike Lee coined that phrase, super duper net magical Negro, and and so once that phrase comes out there and you start looking at Stephen King's books and how they are translated into his films, you see evidence of there being this super duper magical Negro. And these were just 3 of the characters that we pulled out. Of course, only one deals specifically with our topic, which is the African American female protagonist. But in his other books where there were significant African American female protagonists, which is the Gunslinger series, she's not as much, we have some differences on that. I don't believe that Susanna Dean in the Gunslinger series presents as a magical Negro. I do believe that to be the case with Mother Abigail, with John Coffey, with Dick, I think it's Dick Halloran, who Scatman Crothers actually plays. And so that use of that kind of character is what you see over and over again, I think, in Stephen King books. Mother Abigail, like we said, becomes Moses, right? She's selfless. She is much less educated than some of the people that she deals with, not all, but some. And she comes across as having this super spirituality where she talks to God for the people, much like Moses did in the book of Exodus. And that's how she comes across. And so, did you all have any other insight on that?
So I think that the definition, the way it reads, fits Mother Abigail and your comparison to Moses, because even in the story, Mother Abigail is led by God. She continues to go to God for some type of direction to tell these people. She's on purpose about not being prideful. She wants to do this. In fact, in one of the last scenes, she goes out from the people so she can come back to get the final instruction from God without it being her words, but being what God's words would be. But the difference for me is in the portrayal of Dana in the book Kindred. She is not necessarily kind of exactly the mirror image of that, meaning she is not looking to be led by God to do it, but she does become the moral compass for everybody in the book. She has an opportunity to, she carries this knife with her when she starts making the trips back and forth, but she always has an issue with whether or not she's going to use it. Even in her own defense, when she knows her mortal, her mortality is in jeopardy, and she even talks herself out of using it, even though she thinks she will. What happens in the book is the magical part is every time she's in that type of danger, she transitions into back to to her time, and out of that time, and doesn't come back again until the character that she's supposed
Rufus.
to, Rufus, is in trouble again. But she does provide the moral stability for the entire book, because nobody else is thinking that at all. It's not even introduced in the writings unless we're thinking about the thoughts of Dana in the presentation of the book.
She definitely is not a magical Negro.
Right.
You have something else?
Absolutely. I would say that the character Susanna would be in her early instances of coming into the Dark Tower series would be an example of not only Roland's magical Negro, but her own. The character is brought in, Odetta, is brought in to help Roland get to the next step, getting towards, closer towards the tower. She's a little resistant at first, but Odetta herself is a calm presence. She's a collected figure that makes everybody think just a little bit differently from how they were thinking originally. You know what I mean? When they see a situation as hopeless, she's like, I've been through terrible situations in the past. that would make me believe that the situation that we're currently in isn't as bad as what you guys are portraying it to be. Let's move forward. And I mean, that's the kind of character that she seemed to portray to me. Detta Walker, her alternate ego, seemed to be her, the person that she relied on to be able to take care of her frustrations with the world that she was living in, her family, the outside authority, her frustrations with the way that she's viewed as a woman, as well as the way that she's viewed as a black woman, and a way to de-stress from the prim and proper form that Odetta has to present in front of everybody, being the daughter of a person who's in charge of a conglomerate.
I didn't, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, so you think the
That she
character
is-
and the alternate character are kind of like Du Boisian. So you're saying, like with the Souls of Black Folks, when the description of the double consciousness.
Yes,
So
she's a literal manifestation of the double consciousness, and Susanna is the combined effort of both. With both Susanna, with both Odetta and Detta, you have the extremes of the person that is educated, is proper, and knows how to deal with society, versus Detta, who's the less educated, more
primal.
Primal's a great word. Angry character who's aware of the situations and the reality that she lives in, but also separately lives in her own world where all she sees is the way that things are happening to her. You know what I'm saying? So a manifestation of her anger, you know what I mean, towards the time that she was born in and the environments that she's put herself in. Not necessarily put herself in, but has been put in by other characters.
What were you gonna say?
So when I look at because I was looking at the Detta Walker, Odetta, Detta, and then Susanna Dean, how they go together. So this person is a schizophrenic.
Yes.
Right? She's diagnosed with multiple personalities, right? And so because of
Do
this.
you all know who the character he's talking about? Do you all know who these people are?
The Gunslinger
The
series
Gunslinger series.
If
from
you go to
Stephen
the
King.
next slide, you can be able to see a picture of her.
There she is.
Right. So I don't know if you wanted to explain who she was for everybody.
If you haven't read the series, Stephen King wrote, this was his homage to J.R. Tolkien. So he loved Lord of the Rings, the whole Lord of the Rings series, and he wanted to write something that would be his homage to that. And so he wrote this series called the Gunslinger series. And The Dark Tower is the quest. It's a quest. So there's 7 books, and then there's a prequel, and then there's a couple other books off of that as well. But in the 7 books, you go from the introduction of the gunslinger and his quest, and then in the next books he brings in other characters who become a part of his quartet or his group, his posse, and they are on a quest. And they have small encounters here and there, sometimes more than small encounters here and there, but ultimately everything is leading towards their encounter with the Dark Tower. So the characters are the gunslinger, there's Jake, he's a boy who is brought in, then there's Odetta Holmes, who has 3 personalities, really 4, and then there's Eddie Dean, who he brings in. I think he brings in Eddie's 3rd. So there's Jake, Eddie, then Odetta. And then the story of these 7 books is them moving toward the Dark Tower, which is the ultimate quest. And so Odetta Holmes is the African-American protagonist that's a part of this quartet who sometimes comes across, as Aaron said at the very beginning, I'd say in book 2, as maybe a magical Negro. But she, as her character develops,
she changes
into her own, a woman of her own right,
Exactly.
much like a Dana, much like Lauren from Octavia Butler.
But I think she continues to be, from our definition, magical in the book because she continues, even though she's fighting inside herself, whether or not she's gonna help Roland, who is the character who's gonna face the ultimate evil throughout the series, and her personalities, as the book goes on, they seem to mesh and they make one personality because she gets introduced at one extreme, and then we find out her other extreme, which is really something different, and then Roland plays a part in bringing both of those together to make one balanced individual who continues to help in the Dark Tower series until almost the absolute very end. But if we make some type of biblical reference or characterization that is associated with it, because she has a disability, in that disability it is used to ultimately help the person who is going to defeat evil. It gives you the sense that God can use anybody. And in this case, he does. You know what I mean? She is not the person who is praying necessarily for guidance from God, but at the same time, this is the one that's used to help the ultimate one to defeat evil in this series. That's just a view from my perspective.
You know, I agree with you to some extent, but I think that the problem with Susanna Dean, who is the one character that becomes the one of the two, she also has her own goals and her own plan. Right?
Just like we do.
Exactly. And even after she becomes one character, when these two come together, she still manifests another character, which is Mia, right? When she becomes pregnant and brings into the world Roland's son, son,
That's right.
who's kind of a monster, right? And so
You have to make this series.
It's a depiction of us.
I would say that
In many
character
faces of us.
is a manifestation of what happened when she was being helpful as Odetta.
I understand.
You know what I mean? So really, it's Mia would be a literal example of the loss or the departure of the magical Negro character. Because while Mia is there, not only does she have legs, unlike Susanna, she also has her own thought processes, separate and distinct from the character, from the body that she's in. So
And she becomes white.
And she becomes, which is, it's crazy. It's crazy to watch a black woman with no legs grow white legs.
Right, exactly.
And then walk around and call herself something totally different. So it's just like, who is this blood-covered, dirt-covered person who's a lost character? You know what I mean? When you try to converse with the person, she didn't even want to talk to anybody except the person in her own head.
No, true enough.
Let me throw a monkey wrench in here though. So I'm also a psychologist. So I would say about the Detta character is interesting to me that the person who, that the magical Negro is someone who's crazy. You know, that she has a relatively severe disability, mentally and physically.
And
If you haven't read it, when Susanna was a little girl, she was pushed down and her legs were amputated. Is it a bus or a train?
There's a subway train.
By a white person. And so that's what happens to her. So that's why she's in a wheelchair from a child. And her parents were very upstanding citizens, and they really fought really hard to be middle class and make sure they acted properly, and etiquette was really important to her family. So Odetta is kind of like the opposite of all the things her parents told her not to be. Don't be loud. Make sure you use correct English.
Don't be vulgar.
And don't be vulgar. And so, and then when Mia kind of emerges, it's kind of like, I thought it was interesting that Mia grows white legs and becomes white, sees herself as white. So it's like, so in order for us to make it in culture as black people, we have to be like white people. Is that what he's trying to say with that?
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
So once again, it's to serve as white people. We need to be acceptable to white people. That, to me, she's the quintessential magical Negro because of that. Because magical Negroes aren't their own persons, and they don't have their own agency, and their purpose, often very sacrificial, is to help white people, and that's the issue. And Dana, to me,
It's the opposite
She's
of that.
there to help the white person, but she has her own motivation, which is if she doesn't help this white person, because she often wonders, should I help this white person? But she does it because he's part of her lineage.
Right, if she
So
doesn't help him, she won't be born.
She realized she wanted to be born. So
She
there
has her
is
own
some,
choice.
her own right. So she's helping him, and she ends up having a lot of self-talk, a lot of torment about what it means to help this person, who in some ways is not a horrible person because he's a product of his time, he's in slavery, but also does some really horrible things. And it's not particularly thoughtful. He'll do things because it's the tradition of his time, and that's what it calls for him to do. Like it says a couple of times where she's beaten severely. And when she asks later on, and why did you do that? He's kind of like, well, I had to because it would be expected of me to do that. And if you did engage in this bad behavior or this wrong behavior, then if I didn't do that, then other people would think they could get away with the time. So he never thinks to act outside of his time, where she's constantly getting him to think, yeah, but you don't have to make these choices. You can make different choices. I think Mia, to me, is like, Mia is the integration of all the personalities, and in psychology, that's what some multiple personalities, that's what you want, but she's so different in some ways than everybody else. So I was trying to figure out what was he trying to say in that she couldn't be authentically who she was and be acceptable. But for her to do this, she had to become more quote unquote white.
But she was a tool.
Yeah,
You know, the character Mia was the tool.
Of the Crimson King.
Right, of the Crimson King to bring Mordred
into the world.
absolutely. And so she doesn't have her own agency. Her whole being is made to be mother.
Right.
That's what Mia means.
Yes.
And so with Dana, Rufus, who is the character that she is trying to save over and over and over again, the reason she is being transported is to save Rufus over and over. But she doesn't save Rufus, meaning morally, at all.
Right.
Rufus is who he is.
Right.
And is not interested in being anything other than who he is. And you find that, of course, at the end of the book, Rufus has come around to be just as terrible as he was as his father. But she's compelled to save Rufus because she's trying to save herself. In that way, that's so different than the whole magical Negro notion, in that she's not doing this for altruistic reasons. She's doing it to save herself. You know, it happens to her, I think, within, you know, the story, this whole idea of being transported back and forth in this time period is thrust upon her, and she deals with it, but she's not saving Rufus because she's so wonderful and so insightful and so connected to God or any other spirituality. She's saving Rufus so she can save her.
It's so interesting.
Absolutely. And I think that is the big differentiator between being a magical Negro and just having your own agency.
And also, once she realizes that the next generation is coming forward, she takes her hands off of Rufus and says, good luck. You know, because now that I know the next generation was born, I'm out.
Right.
And that's when she doesn't go back anymore.
Well, after she kills Rufus.
Right, yeah,
Right.
she makes sure, yeah.
Right.
I would argue that Rufus was very much affected by her coming back and forth. Not only because his life was saved on those several occasions, but also because it's a perspective that he never even thought to think of. You know what I mean? Back then, it was he was acting in accordance with his time. So thoughts from the future being presented to him by a person who constantly keeps saving him, who keeps saying that his descendant, changed his way of thinking. He couldn't change his way of acting in front of people because acting a certain way could have major consequences within the community that he lived in. But I would argue that was what made him as crazy as he wound up being closer and closer to the end, especially with her understanding that the future generation would progress with or without him still being alive. That's another thing that contributed to him.
In the end, he frees his children, and she really gets him to do that.
She does.
Yeah, to make sure that
And he wouldn't have done it at all without
her.
having met her at all. Like, he just wouldn't have done it.
No, that's true. With the comparison, I think, with Dana and Lauren is, of course, the circumstances are very different.
Mhm.
Dana is in this time warp, this time
Right.
changing thing, and Lauren, of course, is thrust into this dystopian situation
Right.
where she creates her own religion, where she becomes the leader of a pack. So it starts with her, then she and a couple of friends, and then she and a whole group of people who are trying to get to a place where they can restore some normalcy after their whole world has been torn apart with the fall of the wall in their community in both the parables. And the second parable, of course, is more of a view of Lauren from her daughter's eyes. But the whole concept of Lauren taking control of the situation, she has her own agency. Dana has her own agency,
Dana has her own.
which is very
Absolutely.
different than what we see in Mother Abigail,
Absolutely.
what we see sometimes with Susanna. I'm still,
Yeah.
I'm hearing what you're saying, but I don't know if I agree completely that she's a magical Negro. But even with the other characters that we show on the screen, with John Coffey from The Green Mile and with Dick Halloran from The Shining, their purpose is specific to take care of the white people that are around them.
I
mean,
think
that's
all of
their-
them is seen as, Dr. Moloch brought up that many of them are always seen as having some type of disability. So whether they are like Susanna Dean, who has a diagnosed disability, they are normally some type of, in some type of marginalized position, either by choice, like Dana, who is, I mean, even though she's thrust back in time into antebellum South, she still has to choose for self-preservation to be subservient. You know what I'm saying?
In that circumstance.
In that circumstance, because for survival.
To live, absolutely.
To live,
Absolutely.
but they always have to present themselves in that subservient way by choice, or either by how culture sees them, or by them actually having a disability. John Coffey is not a smart man, right? He's not seen culturally as that.
That's right.
You understand what I'm
He's a
saying?
healer.
He's seen as a
He's a
simpleton.
healer, right?
Right.
But people can accept him because he doesn't come across with any verbose,
Right.
all
He
that is
purposely is small,
subservient.
never a
he's
threat.
big.
He makes himself small, and his whole persona is small, even though when you see him, you think,
He's
wow,
gigantic.
He's
Gigantic.
huge.
Mhm.
And Dana does the same thing. Her personality is not what she portrays.
Right. She's small, but her
But she's
personality is
smart.
big. But she's
But
She's smart.
she's making a choice to make that presentation in that cultural society because for the acceptance that she needs to get what she needs,
very true.
even to help Rufus. Because she doesn't put it out there in the front. She keeps it always in her pocket, almost like her knife. And she needs it when she needs it.
I think she's adaptable. I think that's how I would describe Dana instead, because, you know, Butler's goal is never to, in my opinion, is she doesn't come across as a writer of magical Negroes. So I think she makes Dana adaptable to her
I agree.
situation.
I agree.
Where
because
King-
because
right,
King,
that's-
like Holloman,
Right.
even when he's talking to the little kid about the shine, you know, we gotta keep this to ourselves because people will think we crazy.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
No, absolutely.
So I agree. There's a change in how the presentation is from Stephen King versus Octavia Butler.
Absolutely.
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 Any questions or comments?
We're just talking.
We're just talking.
This can continue on indefinitely, right? But you know, I'm still a lover of Stephen King. I just
absolutely.
finished his latest book, The Institutes, when it came out. The day it came out, I got it. 2 days later, I was done with it. So I'm still a lover, and so despondent that poor Octavia Butler ended up dead. I was ready to read the rest of. I think The Fledgling was supposed to be her new series, and of course, we're left with just The Fledgling. But I'm still a lover of both of those authors. I just have to recognize the use of characterization or characters and how they present them. And this whole idea of the magical Negro, we see with other authors as well. So the movie Bagger Vance.
Yes, The Legend of Bagger Vance.
Bagger Vance, yes.
Where Will Smith plays the titular character Bagger, who comes along to help Philip Juna win the golf tournament.
Right.
As he has no reason to help this character, who's completely self-serving.
No, his whole purpose is he appears to help him once he's on track.
That's
He
it.
goes away.
Right.
That's it, and then he leaves
Right.
for the day, and then he comes right back, and he's like, "Hey, so have you got your game?
Right.
Looks like you forgot what we just talked about. Think about it like this:
Mhm.
if you do this,
Mhm.
and then he helps him out all the way until he wins the tournament where he doesn't need him anymore. Once you don't need the magical Negro anymore, it's time for the magical Negro to hit the dusty trail, where
Which is what happened with Mother Abigail.
Absolutely.
Right? That's what happened with John Coffey, right?
He's good about
After he
it.
healed the warden's wife, and he healed the main character,
The warden.
Tom Hanks'
Yep.
character, then
Oh,
there was no need for him
the bladder
anymore, and
infection.
so they went on and Stephen King killed him off. There was another one, not Vanguard, Hunger Games. In Hunger Games, there's the magical Negro, and that was the character who was the dresser. He designed all of
the person who Lenny Kravitz plays.
Exactly, Lenny Kravitz plays that part, and his only role, it seems as though, is to fuel her defiance and to give her these fabulous outfits that express who she is and who the district is that she represents. So that was just another example of the use of a magical Negro by another author other than Butler and King.
Do you think that the authors that create these characters would agree with you? Do you think they are intentionally trying to create an archetype like the magical Negro, or is this kind of inadvertent or unintentional? Or?
Yeah, I don't think that they consciously think that. Oh, we had a question.
Well, no, it wasn't a question, actually, it was moving along those lines. I mean, I think that's a trope that plays out, not just in literature and TV and the movies, but I think that's a trope that plays out in our society and in our churches, that often white people do use people of color as a conduit to spiritual connection. And I say people of color because I'm not just talking about black people,
Right.
but I'm thinking about Native
Native
Americans.
Americans.
And because white people don't have culture. I mean, in the way, because we do, but we're so cut off from our roots of whatever it was where we came from in Europe, that rather than go back and try to find that root, those roots, it's easier for us to appropriate what is someone else's spirituality, whether that is within the church, within Christianity, or it's like, yeah, I'm going to become a shaman, and I'm a yogi, or whatever it is. I mean, I think that plays out, and I think by and large for white people, many times that's unconscious. I mean, that we know we're seeking, and we just look for wherever it is where it's easy to pull it from. And so, especially I think in The Stand, Mother Abigail is in particular, I think, kind of, as a black woman, is a character that plays out, is seen in many places. And that's, rather than creating my own conduit to God, it's easier for me to go to someone like that and pull from that and really kind of suck that out. I think is, yeah.
It's actually minor. So typically, I'm very much a scholar of the "and the author is dead" sort, where they're very only the text matters. That said, King has been directly asked about the magical Negro thing by Playboy magazine of all places.
Wow.
They-
Which is a very amazing article.
This is important. So they interviewed him, and they said, you've been accused of this, and they gave him the history. they, Spike Lee, and he said, yeah, I'm aware. And they said, well, I mean, do you have a reasoning for it? And he said, yeah, I do it on purpose. And which took the interviewer, he's like, and why would you do that? He said, white liberal guilt. He was very explicit about it. He was very explicit about it. He said, I don't remember the exact words. I remember that part, white liberal guilt. But he explained that it's his feeling that he personally feels guilt towards the way that. Now, I'm not going to say he's doing it right, because I do also agree that there's some problematic. But in his mind, he is trying to elevate a culture that he feels his culture has destroyed over time.
Oh, wow.
That's his theory. Now, that said, he's writing these characters in his own mindset as a white man who's done a lot of cocaine.
And alcohol.
He has,
Right.
but not. I mean, he has. And he's also Stephen King, which has a very interesting imagination.
Oh, absolutely.
But,
interesting is a good word.
Yeah, but once I learned that, it's odd that there is intention behind it, and it's so. Whereas typically we might be asking ourselves, well, how can we frame what the author's doing? Well, what is the impetus for this? He's saying specifically, yes, I am doing this on purpose for this reason, which makes me read that every character. Well, so he was aware of it. So in Shawshank Redemption, Red's not black, but he was aware that they were turning him black for the movie.
Right.
And so he knows that. So there's an intention there where he's like, yes, I am specifically taking an other population and attributing, spiritual superiority to them for narrative reasons, and I'm doing it on purpose because I like to correct the way that my white reader sees it. Does it work? I don't know. But there is an awareness which makes me read the book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, and for me, I think I haven't seen it and played with, but I have seen his response to this some other place. And I have mixed feelings. I still love Stephen King too, but I do feel very ambivalent about this. I feel like I almost wish it were unintentional. Because I think it is his attempt to elevate what he thinks about people of color, but I think the part that he's not seeing and he's also not addressing in that answer is that they're in the service of whites. That's the part he's like missing that.
But isn't it still serving him?
Very much so.
Right?
Yeah,
So,
I think it's a swing to his own guilt.
serves him, and so it's a double fault.
Yeah, good point,
And I don't think it's. I think he thinks it's an excuse. I don't know that it is.
Right.
I don't think it is.
Check it out.
Yeah.
And it's just like people go to the sweat lodges or people who do yoga. Like yoga's a spiritual practice, but now it's like this exercise thing or stress and the spiritual part of it that it was connected to, or like the sweat lodges are often disconnected to the community from which they come and the struggles of that community.
And the purpose of the sweat lodge.
Right.
Which was to have a higher spiritual connection, not to lose weight or,
Right.
or limber up.
Sometimes
Right.
I did do a sweat lodge once, but it was with a community that was connected to Native people and to those struggles and who would respond, like the people. It was at a place in Montana that was called Peace Valley, that the Native people never fought there. And whenever Native people came there for things that were held there, they stayed for free, the community supported them, they were welcome to come. So this was something that they gave back, but we were connected, we heard the stories. They would come and say, this is what we need for our community, and we'd all throw in money, whatever it was they needed. So then it was a little different, it was more, but a lot of these things are done without that connection to the spiritual community from which those practices come.
So I go back to, I've been thinking about what you said since you first articulated it, but it goes back to support kind of what you said. In these instances, these are people who deal with a spiritual participation without a God commitment. And so even in The Stand, the character, I can't call it again, the character who is mute, who can't talk. Nick expresses in writing, I don't necessarily believe in God. I don't really care about that. But he'll hold hands in prayer in connection with Mother Abigail, because this is my focus is not offending her, and she has the plan. She's connected to God, but I don't necessarily have to commit. But I can do the spiritual participation. So I think that there's some much merit in like the yoga thing. And oftentimes there's some unconscious bias connected with how people live out their reality when it comes to some type of spiritual commitment. I mean, most people go to the divinity schools, we have a commitment to a higher power. We've designed that, and then we
Not always, though.
not always, but I mean,
Well, that's true.
and
Some
I
people
found
are
out
different.
some of them fall away from it as they're going
That's
through the divinity process.
That's very
But
true.
but normally there's some type of commitment, or either the student is struggling with the commitment, and so. But when we start talking about for whole cultural participation, it's easy to say I'm spiritual instead of to say I'm committed to my faith.
Yeah.
So, if you take that, is that, again, with King, you're guessing intent or whatever, but is that, regardless of intent, is it irrelevant? So the quote I'm making of, and this is something that I'm sure everyone in this room has heard a bajillion people say, somewhere on the spectrum between devoutness and atheism, there's the person who says, I'm spiritual but not religious. Right, and that's, and you know, I'm trying to think, the Church of Secular Humanism, which is specifically atheist, but trying to be as devout as possible in its atheism, right? So that's sort of a odd place that doesn't fit along that continuum, because you should be on this side, but you're behaving as though you're all the way on this side.
Right.
Whereas the person in the middle, the I'm spiritual but not religious person, you know, like that is literally what you're saying. It is literally I believe the person saying that is saying I am trying to take the aspects of theism without you know, but
Without the God.
yeah, and I can't fault that, right? But I mean, it is a very specific. I am morally over here, but ideologically over here,
Right.
Which is an odd, yeah. It's an odd thing to like sort of like think of the ramifications of, and yet it's probably worth exploring in literature because it is a more and more I'd say secularization of America. It is a relatively common viewpoint.
And I work for.
This is gonna be the last comment because we're.
In my regular vocation, I work for the Secretary of Defense, and I hear often conversations of politicians who act in this way. They really feel that they're doing the moral right thing. At the same time, their realism is completely on the opposite side because their votes say something different. You understand? But they do it in the name of.
I'm sorry.
I don't know
what I mean. Which secretary?
But I hear it all the time. Not the secretary. Let's say I need my job. But I'm
This is
just.
on tape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's on tape.
We'll edit it.
But I hear these conversations of how people live every day
Yes.
on that spectrum.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think sometimes people say that though because when they say I'm not religious, they mean that they can't embrace religious institutions.
Right.
And it's not necessarily a lack of commitment to God, but a lack of commitment to institutions. And people see that, which is true, historically religious institutions have done a lot of harm. They've done a lot of good too, but they've also done a lot of harm. And I think after a while, when people, there's a saying that only the church shoots its wounded. I think people, when they have that as their experience, it's very difficult for them to embrace religious institutions.
That plays out in Kindred. Her father is the Baptist minister, right?
Right.
And she rejects a lot of what she learns about Christianity and forms this earthseed religion within the book. And I think that also plays out in Octavia Butler's life. Her family was very Baptist, Black Baptist, and she rejected, some of the tenets that they espoused in the house. And so many times, I know we know that because we see it in our own churches, and we understand it from our divinity school education, that we kill the weak. We do that. We hurt people and we run them away from God rather than embracing them and telling them, you're a part of the kingdom just like I am,
Thank you all so much.
Thank you all.
Well,
Thanks so much.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thanks so much. Yes, sir.
Oh, wow.
So if you guys have thoughts, you want to either explain law, but
Yeah, that'd be great.
do you know, I think Wayne's Post is the most recent one.
I don't know, I haven't, yeah.
But my partner posted the most recent one, and he's asking for thoughts on it. So, and it's very open, and so literally, we're gonna talk about it. You can email me, or you can just go, that's the blog, that's me. So, either way.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Yep, thanks.
So I am
and my mother is my mother and one of them.
Almost as if they have these powers.
Yeah.
So he sort of tells me that.
My middle brother. Stephen King books. Because my mom loves it. And she's like, sure, you want to read a novel. I mean, and my mom is, but like, but to my mother,
Oh, you're.
that's what we
I know, right? When I told that, I was like, oh,